Shavua Tov, my dear friends. I hope you all had a good Shabbat. We're going to be studying the chapter 4 of the laws of the foundations of the Torah. Over here in this chapter, the Rambam is going to be discussing the various ideas in the 4 elements that we spoke briefly in the end of yesterday's chapter, in chapter 3, and now he's going to be expounding more at length to understand how these 4 elements of essentially all of creation is comprised of them and how exactly that works. So let us begin. Chapter 4 of the laws of the foundations of the Torah, part 1. These 4 bodies of fire, wind, water, and earth are the fundamental elements of all the creations below the sky in this world. Everything that exists, whether it's humans, animals, any crawling creature, fish, plants, metal, precious stones, pearls, mountains, earth, whatever it might be, is all a combination of these 4 fundamental elements. Thus, all the bodies that are existent below the sky in this world are all a combination of matter and of form. So there is the matter of what it is made of, what it is comprised of, one of these 4 elements, and then it has a form of how it all comes together. And the tendency, so he's going to be speaking about the various tendencies and the style of each one of these elements. So the tendency of fire and of wind is to ascend upwards. And the tendency of water and earth is to descend from the sky down below. And these are not something conscious. In other words, the fire isn't thinking about the fact that he's going up, or the water isn't thinking about the fact that it's going down, but rather it is a fixed pattern within them. It's their nature that they were given from God, and this is the way they are naturally. And the natural characteristics of fire is that it's warm and dry, and it is the lightest of all the 4 elements. On the other hand, wind is warm and moist, and water is cold and moist, and earth is dry and cold, and it's the heaviest of all of these elements. Water is lighter than earth, and wind is lighter than water. So each one has its place. So if you were to put all these 4 elements, in a jar, so to speak, what would be above and what would fall down is, so we would be able to understand that. So in other words, we have all these 4 elements which are creating every single aspect of creation. In other words, everything is from one of these elements. And he continues to say that everything, as we know, everything is created from these. And now, so sometimes you can have a combination of all 4 of these. So in other words, you can have one type of creation, whatever it might be, which will have a combination. It will have some fire, some water, some wind, some earth, and according to how much the percentage of how much it has of one element, that's how its nature is going to be. So you can have a certain type. He says that animals, for instance, have their element of fire is stronger within them, so therefore they have that bodily heat naturally. Humans, on the other hand, their the main part of what a human is comprised of is earth. So therefore, as it says in the verse, let us create a human from human was created from earth. So the bottom line is that the predominance of whatever element is found mostly in that creation is going to be the strongest one, and that's the various natures that that being will have. And every creation, every being that is comprised from all these elements. So right now it might look in this form, but eventually it's going to decompose at a certain point. It could take 10 years, it could take 100 years, it could take 1,000 years. But eventually all the various elements will go back to their original form. So although we have earth and fire and water all coming in together to create a certain creation, now as time goes on, it's going to decompose and it will disseminate, and each one will go back to its original source. And then it goes on again, and it's going to reconnect and create something new. And then it's going to again decompose, and that's how it's going to continue on forever. And he gives a very interesting, way to understand this. And he says that the entire time, these elements are interchanging and they are reconnecting and moving on. And one part of the element will change and become another element. And that element will change to become a third element. Like this. He says that the water, the earth that is near the water, so if you have the sand near the water, will eventually be swept up. The moisture within it will be swept up and will become part of the ocean. And the ocean the part that is near the wind, will eventually change and become part of the wind. And the wind certain elements in the wind will turn and to become into fire, into heat, into oxygens, etc., gases. And that's how it always will continue. So certain parts of the element of water will change and become part of the wind, and the wind will change to become a gas, and the gas will in turn change and become earth again. And each element always is interchanging. And he says that, don't worry about it. It's not as if suddenly the element of fire will disappear because it has all become water, earth, and air, but rather a little part of each one is always going to be interchanging and moving along. And all of this is caused, this change within the element is all caused by the fact that the entire sphere, the world, and all the planets are all keep on moving. They're always in revolution, in English we'll call it. They keep on turning and moving, and therefore it will always be changing and evolution, really. And now that's all in the substance, in the matter of what every creation is. But then there is also the form of how it is and what it, the way it's created, and it's the way it comes together to create a certain form which every being looks like. And that comes there's a special angel, the Rambam tells us, is that he's from it's one of the lower levels. It's actually the 10th level, the lowest level of the angel, which is close to the world, so to speak. And that there is a special angel who is in charge of giving every creation their form of what they look like. And you will never find that there's going to be a creation, something that has a form but no matter, or matter but no form. Every creation in this world always will have one of both of these, and that is that everything in this physical world is comprised from these two ideas, form and matter, and that is how everything is existent. And so some will only have two elements, fire and water, and that's their whole being will be made out of that. Some creations will have only one or three or four. So every creation will have, every form will be comprised of certain amount of matter. Then there is an idea where you have form but without any matter. So you have a form, but there is actually no substance to it. That's the angels, etc., which are something which we can only understand, but we can't actually feel or see with our eyes. But they are not physical creations in this physical world. Then there is the soul and the life drive of every creation. So you have within a human, an animal, a plant, everything has a soul, a type of soul, which is making it live, which is making it grow, which is making it alive, it's making it move, etc. And then the highest, and there are various levels of these souls of life. So you can't compare the life drive, the soul of a plant, to a human. There's obviously different levels. And the one of the human being is the highest form, of soul. And this is what it says in the verse when God created human beings. It says, "Let us make man in our image and in our likeness," because this is giving a human being a soul which is a very high soul, and it's able to comprehend. It has the level of knowledge to be able to understand something which is beyond itself. It's able to understand things which are above just materialism. It's able to understand spiritual things that are not necessarily caught by our eye. And this soul is not doesn't eat or drink or anything like that, but rather it's the term which is given is the nefesh and ruach, which is literally nefesh. It means a soul. It means a life drive. And the Rambam says you should know these terms. They're very important, so that we should never mix them up. And he says that this form of the soul doesn't actually need a body. It's a life. It's the idea of life, and it doesn't specifically need a specific body for it. Neither does it need our spiritual, godly soul for it to. It doesn't have to be connected to that. So even if a person passes away, God forbid, and then our spiritual soul goes back to God, and our body goes into the earth. But that that form of living, that life drive, will still be on its own, still existent. It won't be in the body because it has separated from the body, and that's why the body died. But it has definitely a life of its own, so to speak, disconnected from the body, and it is able to understand, that it has comprehension, and this is what it says in the verse, that the dust will return to the earth as it originally was, but the ruach, the life drive, will return to God who granted it. So over here in these first couple paragraphs of this chapter, the Rambam gave us a lengthy explanation to understand exactly how all the various creations work on a very, very basic level. And he tells us that all of these concepts are just like a drop in a bucket. In other words, they are very deep, and we obviously have not explained them at their fullest length, but it's just a little bit of an understanding to be able to get a comprehension of the greatness of what is going on in the world. And he says that the first two chapters that we've studied, in where we speak about and we discuss the greatness of God and how the various manifestations and revelations of God work, and various levels of godliness in our belief of God, those are very, very deep and very high levels. And the next two, chapter 3 and 4, and where we discuss the various elements of the world, those are a little bit lower, but again, they are still very deep. And he says that the first two chapters, which are called the Maaseh Merkava, the godly chariot, so to speak, the works of the chariot of God, those are things that are very, very high and very holy, and they're not to be studied just by anyone at any given point. And only, very wise and great sages, they are the ones that should study the depth and, really dwell into it. But the second set, in other words, the chapter 3 and 4, and where we discuss the various elements of the creation of the world, so over here, those are also not meant to be just, spoken in public and given over to everyone, but rather they should be taught to individuals one-on-one, so that we can make sure that they should understand it properly, in a complete manner, without misunderstanding anything. So now the Rambam says at the end of all of this, after all of these 4 chapters, so the Rambam now summarizes to a certain extent, everything that the point of why he brought all of this up. And he says that when a person will meditate on these matters and he will recognize that all the creations, the angels, the spheres, humans, everything that exists, he will then be able to appreciate the wisdom and the greatness of God. Blessed be He. And this will bring him to add in his love and in his fear for God, and he will thirst to connect to God. And he will stand in awe and in humbleness, and he will realize that what is he in comparison to the greatness of God? A human is so low in comparison to the greatness of this mighty, awesome God. We are just, we are mere mortal creations. And he will see himself as a vessel full of embarrassment and shame, empty and lacking. Because we want to become embedded, we want to embetter ourselves and get closer to God when we see how great God is. And all of the above mentioned topics, which are discussed over here in these chapters, they are called the idea of Pardes. Pardes literally means an orchard, but it means the hidden orchard where not just anyone can go and take a walk. It's not a garden which has a free entry to anyone at any point. But rather, after a person has studied all the laws and he has studied all the fundamentals of what it means as a human, as a Jew, etc., in the Talmud and in Jewish law, only then should a person go and really delve deeply into it. And it says that, the big matters like the understanding the greatness of God are, very big in comparison to the ideas which are discussed in the Talmud, which are, so to speak, small matters. Just, talking about monetary issues and so on and so forth. Worldly ideas. And although they are smaller, but the Rambam says that first a person actually should, delve into those smaller matters, and then eventually, once he will become, greater and he will have a better base of knowledge, then he will be able to go deeper and understand the greatness of God. But on the other hand, we find that the Rambam does start off his entire book of Rambam by discussing these 4 chapters, by discussing these ideas of understanding the greatness of God and understanding the greatness of the creations, the works of God and what He created in this world. So there obviously is simultaneously, while we study the Talmud and Jewish law and so on and so forth, there is obviously very important that we also have although not going into the secrets and understanding very, very deep things, but understanding the basic of what God is all about, what our belief in God is, who God is, and why we believe in Him, so on and so forth. So that is definitely highlighted by the fact that the Rambam does begin by discussing these things. And as we will see tomorrow, we will actually be continuing and really discussing the belief in God, what that means on a practical level. But we will see that tomorrow. So, very well, my friends. Have a very good night. We will be in touch tomorrow morning, God willing. Continuing on with chapter 5. Have a very good week. Shavua Tov.